Welcome to Talking About Design. This is our design salon here with Michael Rohd, which we're super excited about. My name is Melissa War, and I'm a doctoral student at Arizona State University. And we have this group we call Talking About Design. We have a website at talkingaboutdesign.com. And we're just really interested in how we intentionally create things in the world and interact with the world to really come to new understandings and improve things really around us. And so we started these salons. You can see more on our YouTube channel. We started these salons so you can go and watch old ones or new ones and just think about new ideas related to design. And I've got Alex here. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself, Alex?
Absolutely. My name is Alex Sweers, currently finishing up a master's program at ASU in the Learning Design and Technologies program. And I will be joining on again in the fall as a doctoral student. And that's a bit about me, but we have our special guest here as well. So we're going to go ahead and introduce him.
Yeah. And so I don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, you can type questions in the chat. There'll be a survey link as well, and we'll kind of answer those questions as we go. But to introduce Michael here, I was thinking today about when I first met Michael, and I don't know if he remembers this. It had to be, I think it was 2017, and it was a retreat thing that I was doing with my advisor in my advisor's office. And he started talking, and I don't even remember exactly what he was talking about, but I remember sitting in the room and like running over to my backpack to grab my notebook because I was like, I got to write notes about this. This is really important or very interesting. And at the time, this 5 spaces for design framework that we talk about a lot. At the time, it was called the 5 Discourses of Design. And it was just within the first month or two of developing it. And we had this idea of process design that we're trying to work out and other elements. And Michael just all of a sudden brought all these new insights to it, which I can't specifically remember, but I think they've been integrated in everything we've done since then. And he also liked my cookies, which he probably doesn't remember either.
So wait, it was a retreat? Where was it? Who was it?
It was an oopsie retreat. It was in Scottsdale at the.
Oh,
it was Punya's group.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
I do remember that.
Yes.
And I do remember the cookies.
That's good. You remember something.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
It was my first year at ASU, and so later I was able to take a course with Michael on process design and creative facilitation, which has really impacted my dissertation work and how I've really interacted supporting others in groups in interesting ways. It's just shaped how I approach these circumstances. So that's a personal introduction. I'm going to let Michael give whatever formal introduction he would like, and then we'll go ahead and ask him some questions.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My formal introduction is that I am an ensemble member at Sojourn Theater, which is a 21-year-old theater company that works around the nation. I am a co-founder of a nonprofit called Center for Performance and Civic Practice. And I am part of a collective of 10 there that now leads and operates that organization, which collaborates, coaches, and consults and supports for arts, design, culture, and heritage collaborations with municipal agencies and community organizations and nonprofits around the US. And I'm an institute professor at ASU in the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts, where I teach a bit. And I also work on cross-university projects and initiatives. So yeah, that's and I'm a dad, and I'm a husband, and I'm hoping everyone out there listening or watching later on recording is doing okay in these very strange times. I hope you're healthy. I hope we're all holding space to stand against racism, and in particular, anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander sentiment, which we know is on the rise, demonstrated by the horrific crime in Atlanta the other day. So all those things are with me and on my mind as we are here together today.
Yeah, so much going on right now. I'm interested in how you got into, because I know you work a lot with different groups of people to discuss like difficult issues. When I was in a course with you, we were reading How to Be an Anti-Racist and having discussions around that, topics that are really hard to talk about. But you've developed different methods and different ways of thinking about how to support others. And I'm interested in how when you first became interested in this facilitation idea and how that developed across time.
And just facilitation in general?
Yeah.
So my background, so I'm Jewish. I grew up going to Quaker school, and I'm a theater person. So I would say from Judaism, in my cultural lived experience, there's a lot of verbal expression and arguing and ideas present in my experience. Quaker means I went to a lot of meeting for worships in my school time, which, if you don't know, is a specific kind of being silent as a group until somebody is moved to speak. So a Quaker meeting is very different than like going to a synagogue or a church. And I'd been going to synagogue as a kid, and then all of a sudden was in Quaker meetings. So at a young age, I became, I think, somehow intrigued by the difference in the ways people are in spaces together and the different ways that spaces are held with intention or not. And then as a theater person and as a director and a co-creator of devised work, for my whole adult life, just about, I've been in rooms and often leading rooms where folks are attempting to create together. And also I've been teaching my whole adult life, from workshops to teaching in more formal settings. So all those things, cultural background, exposure to different kinds of space holding and keeping, the work of directing and the work of leading creative activity, all that has sort of always had me interested in like what it means to hold space and guide a process. I don't think I started using the term facilitator until 1992, when I first led some Hope is Vital work in DC, this organization I founded. Then I think I started using the term facilitate. And then probably got a little more active at like understanding what that meant and trying to build my own practice around that. It's probably a longer answer than you wanted, but there's some context.
It's really interesting, actually. Can you tell us about the Hope is Vital project a little bit?
Yeah, so I was an actor in DC in 1991, and my day job was teaching theater at a school. It was a Quaker school, and one of the parts of being a teacher there was you had to do a service project with students. So I had a good friend who was doing sculpture workshops at a place called Healthcare for the Homeless, which was a confidential clinic for homeless men and women living with HIV and/or AIDS on the 5th floor above the Union Street Mission Shelter, a very famous, since closed down, giant shelter in Washington, DC, where I was. So I went down and started doing theater workshops, and that turned into a project with a group of men at the clinic and a group of teenagers at the school where I taught. And we named the work, sorry, somebody in my neighborhood seems to be doing something. But we named the program Hope is Vital, both in terms of HIV, standing for human immunodeficiency virus, but also Hope is Vital being a translation, a shift of what those initials could mean. And that was a man from the clinic, Tim Williford, who's a part of the program, who said at the very beginning, let's use this project partly to remake the meaning of HIV, and let's not have those 3 letters be a stigma I carry around. Let me say them proudly in relation to this work we're doing together, which was theater-based community dialogue work. So I did that in DC for a year and a half with an ensemble of men from the clinic and teens from the school. And then I spent 7 years traveling around the US, starting up ensembles like that in communities, rural and urban and suburban communities. I would basically get artist residencies, 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, and work with a high school a college, an arts council, a theater company, a correctional facility, a health department. And I would sort of basically become a facilitator slash trainer and build a local ensemble to do that kind of interactive dialogue and theater work. And then I would leave, and that group, and part of my deal was I had to train folks in facilitation, and then I would leave and that group would continue to do that work locally. So I spent my 20s basically doing that around America, which was a huge learning journey on facilitation. I mean, to be in all kinds of neighborhoods with all kinds of people in all kinds of places, and figure out how to make space, hold space, help build capacity. That was, I think I learned a lot about how to be in spaces and hold spaces during that time.
And I'm very curious how those experiences and also, the experiences that you've had up to this point in time, how would you now define facilitation for these projects that you've been involved in? What are some of the guiding principles that you think could be maybe generalized across facilitators?
For a definition for facilitator, or for like guideposts for how to facilitate?
I guess both. Let's start with the definition though. I'm very curious how you would define facilitation.
I think I put facilitation on a page alongside words like teaching, directing, guiding, coaching, mentoring, and then basically in different contexts, I try to work through with folks like how they see those things related and different. I know I am often in the role of teacher, director, or leader of a co-creation space, and facilitator. So for me, what makes facilitation specific is it is the responsibility to hold a space for safe, brave, collaborative work that is leading towards some agreed upon, that is working with an agreed upon purpose. I don't want to say working towards an agreed upon outcome, because hopefully discovery is a part of a facilitated space, even if there's a goal for what you're doing. So there's a purpose that's shared by the people in the space that has been agreed to. If you're not in a space, if you're leading a space that's like mandated and there isn't a shared purpose, I actually don't think you're facilitating. I think you're teaching, which can involve some of the principles of facilitation, but is different than facilitating, I think. Or I think maybe you're like discussion leading, but I think facilitation is when there's shared space and shared purpose, and you are attempting to help a group move forward in ways that they want, while also making sure that the space is respectful, loving, and generous, and anti-racist. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And it's so interesting to me from a design perspective, when you're talking about supporting something that you don't really know what the outcome was, right? The difference between purpose and like an outcome, that you're trying to help people with a common purpose, but that can actually support different types of discovery. So you're trying to create a space that allows flexibility, which seems a little bit contrary in a way, that you're creating something to do that allows difference.
I don't know if it's contradictory. I mean, it's contradictory if you know the outcome. Like if you, and this is why facilitation is really interesting and tricky when you have collaboration between creative and cultural workers and nonprofit and municipal partners, which happens, of course, in the design world around planning or architecture a lot, because the nonprofit world and the municipal world function in result-based contexts and outcome-driven contexts. But ideally, creative and cultural work exists in a context where discovery is necessary for the most productive and exciting generative practice to occur. So I think you have to figure out how to make a space where we agree that we're working towards, it's the difference between commissioning or contracting someone and agreeing to be generative together towards something. If an artist is commissioned to do something, public art mural, you may not need a facilitation. It's a contract process. If an artist is going to work with stakeholders and community members and leadership around a work of art, as opposed to being commissioned to do a specific thing with a specific outcome, then actually facilitation, whether the artist is doing it or someone else is, could be useful, because you're trying to discover what's going to be, not just sort of get to the thing that you've agreed to do. And commissioning and contracting can be beautiful and the outcomes can be known, and that could be great. But I think it's really powerful in municipal and community nonprofit spaces to figure out, how do we make a little space for discovery amidst these needs for certainty and results? How do we make a period of time in a process where ambiguity and uncertainty are okay, so discovery is possible on the way to something we didn't know would meet our goals and purpose?
And I think that's one of the biggest struggles that I'm thinking of K-12 settings, where the teachers are trying to implement this facilitator role to allow this creativity, the discovery, the risk-taking for their students. But then they also have to bring in these aspects of leadership. This is my domain, in order to establish a classroom environment that will allow this kind of learning process to occur. And so this is a very fascinating difference, but then also too, it's a very cooperative, almost kind of relationship between these two roles going on.
Yeah, I might suggest that in my mind, the bigger challenge to teachers taking on a facilitator role rather than a straight pedagogical one is less about the authority or power construct, which needs to be dealt with, and I'll mention that, but is actually about common core curriculum and standards and testing that need to be accomplished. Because the flow of power and how equitable collaboration occurs is something that you can't neutralize, but you can use as a learning tool itself, right? To actually make the power flow in a space legible, and to look at it in the context of social justice movements, the larger world, justice. Like, that's a useful way for an educator to sort of be transparent with a group, note the existing hierarchy, but also note, we want to find a shared purpose in here, and I want to find a way where you are making rules alongside me, not just adhering to disciplinary commitments that have nothing to do with what we're actually trying to do. On the other hand, the standards and the core curriculum demand certain outcomes that the teacher has to accomplish because their job depends on it, whether or not they believe that those are the most important things to share in the room. I think that actually makes a sort of, at times, didacticism feel like it's necessary, which is counter to actual facilitation. But of course, lots of teachers manage to thread that needle and figure out, how can we get creative about making sure that we get to the standards that we need to accomplish what the state mandates that we accomplish, but at the same time figure out creative ways to do it. But it's still a challenge to allowing a large sense of discovery to kind of be at the center of what one is doing. But teachers work on that day after day after day. I actually think that's one of the reasons why teaching is so exhausting and such heroic work, because you're sort of walking that tightrope. We have to figure out how to deal with power and authority. You have to figure out how to deal with the outcomes that are demanded of you, how to treat every whole student like a whole person, how to make opportunities for creativity and healing and discovery. It's the hardest job there is, I think, folks who do that day in and day out.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what's interesting to me, and we kind of have defined process design as almost like a template. Like, you have some process, but what actually happens inside that process could be different. So you might plan a set of activities or something, but you're planning it in a way that you want there to be changes, or you want it to produce discovery, right? So you don't really know what's going to come out of it. And actually, in some of my dissertation work, as I've analyzed it, I did some professional development with teachers, and they actually came out with different meanings of what I was doing from each other. We all did the same thing together, but it was really interesting to me that they were able to come out with personally significant meanings. And I think of that in the classroom, where you have students with different needs, different backgrounds, different identities. And if there's a way to teach in a way that lets them it's flexible enough or adaptable enough that it supports them in coming up with their own ideas and their own outcomes. It's hard to do, but yeah, I don't know if there's a question there. It's just something I've been thinking about lately. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess it gets back to this word design, right? And like, you know, there's this sort of meaning of design. When you say the word design, most folks associate it with a design field, a designer. You know, they might go to interior design, they might go to architecture, they might go to graphic design. I don't think folks commonly think about design in terms of something that you deploy when you're figuring out how to accomplish something in your job or in your home. Or, I mean, I guess a lot of educators talk about designing a lesson plan. Maybe they talk about designing a curriculum, but I think folks also just say making a lesson plan, planning my lesson. And it's interesting when you start to put the notion of design into process and sort of figuring out how you're going to accomplish what you're going to accomplish. And then to what degree does the sort of creative aspects implicit in the word design become a part of how you think about imagining a process? I don't really have anywhere to go with that. I'm just sort of riffing on like the relationship of design to process to fields and spaces where it's not necessarily considered shop talk.
Right. Well, I think so. One thing that if I go all academic or anything on this, like a lot of design literature talks about design being in indeterminacy. So when we talk about science, we're trying to figure out an underdeterminate problem where we're trying to see if we can get something to match reality or figure out something, versus indeterminate, where there could be so many different outcomes and in so many different ways of working on something. And so design is a way to work in that indeterminate space. And so lately I've been thinking about process design as a way to support indeterminacy in the actual process, like the actual situation occurring, setting up some type of structures, which will likely change, right? As you go, you're going to adapt to what happens, but it's almost like you're trying to create a setting for the indeterminacy.
Well, this is good. Is indeterminacy a real word?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it is according to design people.
I wonder if it's a real word, but it's a good word. I like that word because you could basically say there are plenty of fields of practice where indeterminacy is like the worst thing that you could imagine or aspire to. Education being one of them for many, many people. Why in the world would you want indeterminacy in a pedagogical experience that's supposed to transmit knowledge and prepare people for a career? Some people might say. And then other people would say, without indeterminacy, how is anybody going to be prepared to be flexible and adapt to an ever-changing and complex world? And that's ideological as much as anything else, right? Not just right and left, but just sort of values around what people need to thrive. You'd have folks who would say, without indeterminacy, how do you have a chance to grow your own moral compass? And others who would say, no, indeterminacy is the danger to a moral compass. It should just be sort of passed on. So it'd be interesting to go into a local government, go into a city hall and go across the municipal departments and see who, once you made the definition clear, you know, for folks, like who would say indeterminacy is a reasonable expectation or desire or condition for some of the work we do here, versus who would say, I never want that in this building. It's the antithesis of what we want. So design being a way to put a container around opportunities for indeterminacy is very much like saying we need boxes to be creative. We need parameters, right? It's sort of like the umbrella of that, the Uber of that. So that feels interesting to me.
Yeah.
In a devising context, in a rehearsal room, you talk about if you're going to be creating from a starting impulse, you offer a box of, and you can't just say, I mean, you can at a certain point, but you don't say mostly, go make something about this. You say, okay, so here's this research we did together. You've got 15 minutes. Come back having made a 60-second thing, you and one other person. There should be some spoken words, there should be some movement, and use a piece of music. come back and share that. So that's like a parameter, a container, which allows for indeterminacy on the way to something determinate, which will then be shared upon revival, which will then be pulled apart and iterated, and there'll be more indeterminacy and stuff.
Yeah, I like that. I'm just looking at some of the questions in the chat. But one question, and it's kind of related, but someone asked, what's the distinction between design and plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wonder, I would suggest that that as a noun, a design and a plan, I think tend to associate as different things. A plan is subjective. To me, when I hear plan, I think about like a step-by-step process that somebody is saying, you will go through this. And when I think about design, I think about something that's conceptual as well as step-by-step perhaps, but that it has things that happen and within them are unknowns, whereas a plan is all about known to known to known. Again, that's subjective. As a verb, I think to plan and to design also kind of like rise up different thoughts, right? To plan means I got to figure out what we're going to do. To design means maybe I got to figure out what's going to be, but they both involve, I'm just making shit
I
up,
like it.
but I'm just thinking out loud about it. But I think asking that question, the difference between design and plan, is really interesting. What do you all think? What's the difference between design and plan?
Oh, it's such a good question. For me, it actually kind of goes back to the indeterminacy, where if I'm designing something, it's almost like when I'm planning, there's like a right way to plan. I don't know, I'm just making this up too, but it's almost like I'm just putting something forward step by step that's going to happen. And for me, design is a lot more flexible. It's a lot more recognizing that there's assumptions behind what I say, and I can investigate those assumptions, and that changes the perspective I take or the steps I take towards something. Alex, what do you think?
As soon as I saw the word plan, I thought, okay, this is where I think that leader role becomes very crucial. It's almost like you said, a guide path that has to be stuck to, maybe because of procedural reasons, for fidelity, who knows, but I really saw that leadership role being very important for the planning. Whereas with the designing, it's a little bit, I don't want to use the word open-ended, so I'm trying to figure out a different way to describe it, where it's, it's still kind of in the rough, and a facilitator can really help that process, in order to kind of make that collaboration kind of happen, to kind of get different viewpoints while you're designing maybe the plan. That's kind of how I was seeing it. I'm also thinking about some of the obstacles that are facing both a plan and a design too, and how I feel like the obstacles have a lot more weight with the plan, whereas with the design, you can almost kind of take and leverage those obstacles to see how you can either work around them or even maybe take advantage of them. I don't know. That's where the designers, you have to be really creative, I think, in some cases, where the planners have to maybe follow some rules put in place for a reason.
I wonder, I know when I took the course with Michael, we talked a little about resistance. And for me, like, plan has this idea that there's not going to be resistance. And I'm also thinking between plan and facilitate, or leading and facilitating. I don't know, Michael, maybe we should just talk about what resistance is a little bit first too, and what role you see that as playing in facilitating or design or plan or anything like that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, planning for resistance is a pretty interesting, it's like, do you plan for resistance in the way that you prep to simply be in space? Or do you plan specific tactics? Or do you sort of get strategic about, well, here's an example that somebody showed me a long time ago. If I'm facilitating a session, it is beneficial for me pre-COVID times to shake everyone's hand or have a bit of contact that feels okay with folks look them in the eye, say hello, shake hands or fist bump, something with each person individually as they're entering the room or as people are getting settled. And that the reason is, one, for me to feel a connection to each person equally. Two, because if folks feel that moment with me, they may be more generous with their hospitality to me as facilitator. So as opposed to me being, this is a sideways step. We all bring our own lived experiences and histories into every room, right? Facilitator and those being facilitated. So it's very possible that when somebody comes into a room, what I will never know about them is that they hate being facilitated because they don't like authority figures. They don't like somebody running the space because their history is not particularly positive with that in their home life, in their work life, in their school life. And on top of that, they also may not be so comfortable or interested in like a middle-aged white man. Like that's the identity I walk into a space with positionality wise. There's lots of issues of justice and equity there. There's also just the issue of like that read, that presence, maybe one that like is not comfortable for them or that they're just not interested in having authority in the space. So one thing I can do strategically to prepare for that resistance is at least try to honor and respect every individual by attempting to connect and introduce myself beforehand. And for some folks, that eases potential resistance because it's personal and not an authority figure. And for others, it doesn't make any difference. And for me, it helps me just feel a little easier about connecting with folks in the room. So I'll go back from sideways. That's an example of like something somebody shared with me a long time ago as like a tactic of something I could do to try to proactively perhaps relax some resistance that might occur. I think resistance is energy in a space that is not on board with the agreed upon purpose or does not feel safe with the other human beings in the space or with the leader in the space. Or resistance is energy that does not appreciate the way that the time is being guided or handled, or that their presence is being respected. Or resistance is someone who's there with the purpose, but strongly disagrees with the premise that it's been organized around. So they're invested in having the zoning committee meeting, but the zoning committee meeting is to give permission or not to this thing. And the sense is that the meeting's been called to get permission and they do not want permission given. So their resistance is the task more than it is to the event, but then the resistance becomes about the event because they don't approve of the task. So resistance can come from so many reasons and can manifest in so many ways, visible and not visible, you know?
Yeah. I was just thinking of personal experiences when I have felt myself give resistance, and that idea of you gave of the zoning meeting, because I think that's what you said, not agreeing with the premise of the meeting or I don't know how to say it, but that really rang true with me, like with some personal experiences when I experienced resistance in myself, where that comes through. Go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say too, for one of my teams, we read the Culture Code, and I was just looking it up by Daniel Coyle. And in it, there is a chapter where it talks about how, and I see it as being resistance, where for a group that has, I guess, not a whole lot of structure or, you know, a defined goal or outcome, whatever it is that they've agreed upon, those resistors can really impact to such a strong degree, you know, the overall productivity of that group. And so I'm curious to see, in your opinion, you know, how much of an impact do you think resistance could play in group facilitation? Or how much role does it have in when you think about that?
Oh my gosh.
And is it always bad?
Well, that's a great question. No, it's not always bad at all. Because it depends on which of those places it's coming from, right? I mean, resistance that's calling out inequitable or unjust behavior in the room or in the context that has gotten us to the room, that's like a healthy and just resistance. And you need that to learn and to grow and to change, either as a facilitator or the larger thing going on. And then there's resistance that isn't about that, but is more of a kind of personal issue place or an unwillingness to listen place. And I imagine anyone here who has facilitated a bunch has met resistance that that has left a scar. I mean, like we probably all have moments of facilitating where like, oh my gosh, I didn't help that experience be what it could be for everyone. Or I got defensive in that moment of resistance. I clamped down. Or I got scared and I just didn't deal with it. I ignored it. I mean, I have moments when I have not met resistance in a way that I can now say I'm proud of, you know, or just in a way that wasn't effective. So resistance can completely derail an event, a moment, a process, as well as can contribute to something getting healthier. Have either of you ever had an experience with resistance that really sticks with you?
The personal one really speaks to me myself. I taught special education for elementary students. And like you were saying at the start of this, coming in as a white female, especially a young female teacher, there's not a whole lot of weight, I guess, or credibility that I can offer through my appearance alone when I'm working with students who, you know, contrast me in so many different ways, ideologies, especially too. The roles that they perceive, you know, the women in their lives having, you know, there's that kind of obstacle that I think some of us are facing, especially when we think now about, you know, the critical race theory and things like that we're facing together, hopefully, you know, to kind of, I guess, inform and be aware and then move forward with that kind of understanding. I don't know. How about you, Melissa?
Oh, I'm thinking of both ends. I'm thinking of trying to facilitate something. In fact, it was hard with my dissertation because it was almost like I had an outcome. I was trying to support teachers in a process, in basically a lesson design type process or some type of design. But I had this outcome that was my dissertation in my head. And so I was very conscious of like trying to focus on the teachers and not my outcome, but it was still really hard to like negotiate that sometimes. And just that conflict between what my overall goal was versus what I hope the goal for the teacher was, or the purpose, I guess you would say, the teachers was, just created, I think, resistance, and quite a bit of resistance in the teachers. Usually it was okay, but I'm just thinking of a couple specific instances that, you know, it was clearly, you know, I was not doing the best job here because I was very anxious about my dissertation. And that did not help the situation, and set up just some different goals, you know, different purposes, I think, conflicting purposes in a way.
Well, this also makes me think about co-facilitation. I mean, I try to very rarely facilitate alone now. And I didn't used to be super conscious of that. I facilitated a lot alone. And now I really try to facilitate with a partner, at least, who brings in different identities from me, so that more perspective and lived experience is represented in the people holding the space, and so that a more diverse set of participants feel themselves represented, or at least a more expanded representation exists at the front of the room or space. So,
just looking at our chat, someone asked, resistance for K-12 teachers is a daily experience. What are some strategies for convincing learners to get on board with desired outcomes? It's a little bit of a different context, but how, do you have any answers to that question?
I mean, I don't have any answers. I have thoughts. I mean,
what are your thoughts?
A thought I give that some teachers say is just, you know, not doable. But so I should say I was a classroom teacher for a couple years. Oh, I guess I said that when I was starting Hope is Vital. I was a classroom teacher in DC for a couple years. 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I think that one way to not avoid resistance, but get mandated learners in the room more on board is to start the year or to start time with them in a dialogue about, look, we're here because I'm paid to be here. I'm a teacher and you have to be here. Like that's kind of the start, right? I have goals for the year. I'd like to spend a little time hearing what your goals for the year might be. Like, what do you want to accomplish this year? And the whole room might be like, I just want to get out of here. Okay, then that has to be said out loud. I feel that is useful to be said out loud. You don't want folks to pretend to have a goal they don't have. But I find it useful as a diagnostic. And so the whole circle, community, class, group knows, how does everybody see their presence here for the coming year? And if you feel like my goal is to get through it, what can we do to add a goal in there that you would be interested in beyond getting through it? Like, can we figure that out together as a group, in pairs, in small groups? And then I think the next thing to talk about is, how do we want to be with each other for the year? We know discipline's a thing. We know I'm in charge, up in front of the room, I'm doing the grading, but we can create the culture of this space together. What do we want the culture to be? And I might, for me, I might say I'm interested in a culture where inquiry is really rewarded, not just getting things right. So here's some things I'd like to propose for us that will help us value inquiry together. What are some things that are important to you? And I know it might yield like not having homework. Great.
Pizza every day.
Yeah, great. There are things we're going to talk about that I actually would love to have pizza in here every day. I can't do it. Don't have the money, and I'm not allowed to feed you in the classroom. So we can share that want, and there's reasons we can't do it. So what are some different things we want for our culture in here that we can do, or things that we can't do, but that we can at least know we wish we could? So I think having those conversations about why we're here, what goals we might have, what we can collectively agree on for how we want to build a culture together. It ain't going to solve everything, but it is stuff you can return to throughout the year. And it's different than just having to make rules because we have to have rules. So I have found that useful in many different contexts. And I mean with like juvenile offenders in lockup facility, like at the beginning of a residency, to students in classrooms, to adults in different settings. I find that rarely a bad conversation to engage in, as long as one is like humble and transparent. We're not having the conversation so I can give you whatever you want. We're having the conversation to know where we're at and see if there's some stuff we can agree on or make happen together. And a lot of times, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, a lot of times educators and people who do public engagement are nervous to ask the question, what do you want? Or why are you here? Because they are afraid when they cannot deliver on what is said, they are betraying the fact that they asked the question. And that does not have to be the case. Asking the question and listening can be a step towards figuring out how we can find some stuff we can do together. It's not just about a betrayal because I said no, especially if you unpack what the no is about. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to add that in.
Yeah, it's significant to me. And this goes with that, is giving people just the space to answer that question. What do you want? And answer it honestly. Because I think being able to, I think sometimes if you're just trying to, I don't want to say suppress, but you're trying to there's not a space for you to voice how you're feeling about something or to share that. And I think that closes off a lot of potential for future relationship building, and it kind of creates a closed environment instead of something that's safe. And I think it would establish safety too. Hey, I said that I don't want to be here, and he still didn't say that's the wrong answer. Yes. Yes. It builds a safe space.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the chat questions. So one thing Kevin asks, and this is similar to, so one thing I did want to ask is about ambiguity and dealing with the fact that when you're facilitating it, the things might not happen like you planned, right? becoming comfortable with the ability to change directions. And it kind of goes with improvisation in some ways. And Kevin asked, how do you get comfortable or confident with indeterminacy during a process? And he asked if you can talk about your development over time. And so indeterminacy, or just that ambiguity, that knowing that things aren't going to go exactly like you're thinking they will.
Sorry, my development over time, meaning how have I evolved in terms of making that happen?
Yeah.
I think idiot younger me would just assume that everybody should understand that indeterminacy was important. I'm not calling it that, but like that we should all be okay with uncertainty and not knowing, and just sort of presuming that that was right, and that I would work with a group as if they felt that way, and when they didn't, I would sort of remind them how important it was to be able to be in that condition, and almost try to like push through that or drag everyone with me into that, as if that was my role as an artist or facilitator, which is just stupid, and not taking into account that actually the work is to unpack, to analyze, to explore why is indeterminacy uncomfortable? Why is it not rewarded? Why is it not the standard operating condition in various institutions or systems? Okay, so we're thinking about those things, and then what might be positive about being able to exist in it? What might we be able to learn by being within it? What might we accomplish within it that we can't accomplish without a bit of indeterminacy? So first there's the why is it hard or uncomfortable or not wanted? Then there's the what might be useful about it. Then there's the what might we need to set in place here as a group to hold indeterminacy together? You know, what do we need check-ins where we talk about how comfortable we are right now because we don't know stuff? Or do we need to end a session by saying, what do we know today that we didn't know at the beginning? Let's hold on to that amidst all that we don't know.
Yeah. How about from a facilitator perspective? So I listened to a podcast and I can't remember what it was. We'll put it in the post on this. Once I remember what it was, we'll put a link. But it explored Martin Luther King Jr. and his learning to speak, do public addresses, and how for a while he had everything written down all the time and he would practice and it would be exactly right. But then some things happened and he didn't have time to prepare for something. And so he had to become comfortable with just the improvisational act and responding to what he was getting back from the audience, and eventually finding that was one of the most effective ways, his most effective speech, and building on that energy from those around him just became very powerful. And I'm just thinking, like, when you're doing some facilitation where you're having to adapt to the group and let things go from what maybe was originally planned, or maybe even just acknowledging that you're not going to plan every minute of that. Was that ever hard for you to let that flexibility be in there, or the ambiguity?
I mean, I think the answer is I'd like to read or hear that, because that sounds, really nourishing, because I think anyone who does a lot of facilitating or teaching kind of goes through a journey like that, or speaking, I think, or just engaging with people. I think at a certain point you discover that if you hold on tight to what you think is supposed to happen, not as much will happen, not as interesting, not as meaningful, not as potentially transformational. So certainly I used to plan everything out really, really, really specifically and keep it with me on a yellow legal pad. And then I'd put it down over there and I'd refer to it. And then I'd keep it in my knapsack. And then I would take a couple notes, but not look at them after I wrote them down. And then sometimes I would not take any notes and just go in having an idea of what the purpose was and work from there. So I do think, and all of that, telling that story, like, includes many moments of feeling like I'm not prepared for what's happening right now, or, oh my gosh, I'm not sure which direction to go, or I'm supposed to know, I don't know, I'm bad. So, like, how to be present and responsive and thoughtful and focused on purpose, but also all the people in the space, is a skill that one develops with experience and gets stronger and stronger. And when you lose it, or when you feel a bead of sweat, what's the thing that regrounds you? You have to, most folks have some variation on, how do I get myself present? Do I concentrate on my feet? Do I look in someone's eyes? What do I do? You know? No, I think that's really cool to hear. I didn't know that story about how Dr. King kind of moved through his relationship to public speaking. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Alex, did you have a?
Yeah, I see here in the chat, Timothy said that there's just so much fear of failure. And so that and what you're saying too reminds me how, early on that you were facilitating and then you would basically move to a new site and leave the facilitators to kind of stay and continue working with that group. And I can see, having a procedure, having a protocol in place for the facilitation would really help with that, being able to move from site to site. But then there is that element of needing that experience in order to kind of basically wing it, but be successful as you're doing that. And it's that fear of failure that I can see the novice facilitator really kind of, Melissa, you even said like you were so anxious that it really affected your ability to work with your teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm feeling right now for all the novice facilitators out there who are hearing this, hopefully. And,
Yeah, I mean, if you're lucky, you're a part of a community of practice or a small group of practice or a small circle where you can facilitate and have others participate with you, but keep an eye on you and then give you feedback.
Right? That feedback is important.
Really important. It's really important. I mean, I'm not advising this, but I remember when I started Hope is Vital with the group of folks that I started it with, we would videotape sessions with like an old VHS camera that we'd simply stand up behind the participants, and we would watch them. We would watch them. Sometimes I would always watch them, and I would watch facilitation. I would watch myself and my colleagues who I was co-facilitating with, and I was watching myself to figure out how to get better because I didn't have anybody teaching me about that at the time. I was just trying to figure out how to do it, and I'd be like, "Oh wow, you talked too much then. Oh wow, you told a story that was too long. Oh, you let that scene go on too long and you didn't interrupt it and get right to the audience. Oh, you didn't pick up on that issue that was on people's minds and you just barreled ahead." And that was really useful,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a class on creativity with Dr. Ron Bagetto, who's kind of a creativity scholar, and he talks a lot about failure. There's something about why we define it as failure, but he had us do these presentations of our favorite failures. And so I was working with my dissertation at the time, and I ended up making a video of this failure facilitation session. And, I had multi-camera views. And so I could see watching back that video, look at that reaction. I didn't even notice that teacher was just so annoyed with me right then. And so many things. And it was really hard to do. And maybe if I get brave, I'll share it more broadly than just my class then. But
I would love to see it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm brave enough to share it out, but Ron asked if I wanted to share it with they have a favorite failure project. And I was like, I don't know about that. But it was a significant reflection point for me. But what I also want to say is, what do we call a failure? I think it's not meeting our outcomes maybe, or not meeting our goals. But I think that goes back to indeterminacy too. Like sometimes what we call a failure, we might see something that turns out differently than we expected. And it actually might be better, right? It might not be, sometimes we say if it doesn't go exactly like I planned, well, I think that's a failure. But I think a lot of time that's not a failure.
I mean, if we look at everything as practice, not as in not the real thing, but that we are constantly in a practice and practicing and growing our practice, then everything is growing our practice. That said, speaking for myself, not what I would put on anyone else, I definitely have moments when I feel it is fair for me to treat myself as if I failed, that I have failed, that the stakeholders who worked with me on this, I did not make the space or guide the process in a way that got them what they needed out of it. It may not be only on me, but that I have to take that on, or I responded in a moment defensively or something that made someone else's experience not what it could have been because of what I did with my power in that moment. I failed in that moment. I can look at it as a moment of practice, and I want to practice better and get better and get stronger. And this may be also like, I don't know, whatever, neurotic Jew, but like I have a hard time just treating moments when I know that other people were harmed or didn't have the experience that we'd signed on together to have because of something I did or didn't do. I want to hold permission for myself to keep calling myself out on that failure, which is different than it didn't go the way we wanted it. That could be learning, or that's not failure necessarily. But sometimes you mess up, and that's okay. And it's okay to notice that. And maybe it doesn't feel good. Maybe it hurts.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to, but maybe it does. And you don't have to spend too much energy being like, no, I didn't. Maybe I did. And I got to take that in and go on.
It's pretty important too to bring up the stakeholders, because what could be a success for you may not necessarily be a success for another who was either a part of the whole collaboration, the design or the plan, or maybe they're the ones that you're delivering the product to, whatever it may end up being. And there's a lot of variables at play, I guess, when you have a large team or stakeholders involved.
Yeah, have you run into that? That's a big issue, like your stakeholders or other people defining success differently. And
well, you have to get on the same page. I mean, before anything happens, whether it's a large process or a single event, I think it's part of the responsibility of a facilitator or co-facilitator to like, okay, so these are the stakeholders. How are we going to define success together?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not one specific outcome, like what do we want to accomplish? And what are some outcomes you're hoping for? Because if they are all entering that event with different definitions of success, then how can anybody hold themselves accountable for anything?
And I see a comment here where, the perception of failure too may be different. Again, not just, a failure for one versus a failure for another, but how they're perceiving it. Maybe some people are even perceiving failure to different degrees too.
Yep. Well, look, and you can have somebody leave a session where, they don't feel great. They got uncomfortable because something came up and it scared them or it made them mad or something. That doesn't mean you failed. Like, somebody's experience that this wasn't successful because I had a bad time might be like, you know what though? What needed to happen in the room happened. And a lot of people felt very positive about it. And it didn't feel great for you, participant number 17. And I'm sorry. And I maybe could have tried to keep you safer, maybe. But on the other hand, I'm not responsible for your comfort. This event is not about your comfort, depending on what we're dealing with or digging into.
Mhm. Oh, this is so great. We're running out of time. I'm wondering, Michael, if there's anywhere, we haven't we've had such conversation about these issues. I know that there have been at least one or two questions online about specific techniques or things. And I know you wrote a book. I've been actually reading it lately. It's an older book about facilitation.
Yeah.
Are there any other resources people can go to that you know of to kind of learn different facilitation techniques?
I mean, there's a lot of books out there about facilitation, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot. I mean, I think Boal's book, Games for Actors and Non-Actors, isn't just about the theater games, but actually expresses kind of an approach to facilitating in there that I think is pretty useful. I think that, I mean, this is kind of a teacher book, but I think Dorothy Heathcote's work, she's a famous scholar on in-role drama and creative drama, thinking about working with younger kids. But one of her books, I think, is called The Mantle of the Expert. It's all about adults playing in role with young people. But I think that the concepts she talks about are more broadly applicable. I think it's really interesting stuff. I got to be honest, I haven't found a lot of books on straight facilitation that I have found supremely helpful or on the money. Sorry. Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy, which some folks here have probably read. Adrienne Marie, let me see if I can spell it in here. Adrienne Marie Brown. No, Marie, not Mary.
Marie, okay.
Yeah, that's an amazing book and a powerful book. So I would think about looking at that.
Great. And we'll put a blog post about this discussion, and we will put links to those books as well on that discussion, and Michael's book as well, where it talks kind of about your Hope is Vital project a little bit too.
Sure.
In that book.
Sure.
So this has been absolutely fantastic. Any last words of wisdom or advice or thoughts that you want to share?
I would actually read the book you mentioned before, How to Be an Anti-Racist, because although it's not about facilitation, it's about dialogue, conversation, group, institution, systems, very useful for a facilitator to have context for. No, I mean, thank you for having me. Fascinating and great to talk about it with you. And everybody who's thinking about facilitating, just take workshops, take anti-racism workshops, take workshops on decolonizing learning spaces, take workshops on facilitation, and do it, practice it. Melissa, my course is still free and up at ASU, the civic practice, the public modules, there's stuff about facilitation in there. Folks can enroll in that and go through it for free.
Oh, okay, we'll add a link to that as well.
Yeah.
People to see.
But it's great to meet you. Alex, it's great to meet you.
Yeah, no, this has been a phenomenal conversation. So we just want to say thank you again for your time, and thank you for all of the information.
A pleasure.
All right. We'll say bye to our YouTube audience. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye, guys.